"You're old, Mom. You don't need it anymore." Vanessa said it while twisting my wedding ring between her fingers like it was nothing but costume jewelry. The words sat colder in my chest than the empty velvet box she'd left open on my dresser. 31 years of marriage, sold for $11,000 I never saw a single cent of. But I didn't yell. I made one phone call. And by morning, everything her boyfriend had built would be kneeling on my porch, begging. My name doesn't matter yet. What matters is what I built and what I gave away, and what I finally, at 68 years old, decided I would not give away again. I married Walter Hale when I was 22 years old, in a church with a leaking roof and folding chairs borrowed from the VFW hall 2 towns over. We didn't have money for a real reception. We had cake his sister baked and a record player and 40 guests who danced until midnight in a backyard strung with Christmas lights in July. Walter gave me a ring that had belonged to his mother, a thin gold band with a small, honest diamond that had survived the Depression, 2 moves, and 1 house fire. He told me, the night he slid it onto my finger, that it wasn't much to look at, but it had never once let go of anyone who wore it. I wore it for 31 years, through 2 children, 1 miscarriage we never spoke of again, a small auto repair shop that nearly failed twice and somehow didn't, and finally through 6 years of watching Walter's lungs give out from decades of breathing in brake dust he never should have breathed without a mask. He died in April, in the bedroom we'd shared for 3 decades, holding my hand so tightly I had bruises for a week. I never took the ring off, not once. Not to wash dishes, not to garden, not to sleep. It was the last piece of him I had that could still catch the light. I raised 2 children in that house on Larchmont Street. My son, Michael, who moved to Denver for an engineering job and calls me every Sunday like clockwork, and my daughter, Vanessa, who stayed close, who I thought stayed close because she loved me, and who I have since learned stayed close because Denver doesn't have a mother with a paid-off house and a jewelry box. I am not a wealthy woman. Walter's shop provided a modest, steady life, and after he passed, I sold it to his longtime foreman, Ray Delgado, for a fair price that I invested carefully on the advice of a financial planner I trust more than I trusted my own daughter, as it turns out. I live simply. I clip coupons out of habit, not necessity. I have exactly $340,000 in savings and investments that not one member of my family knows about, because Walter taught me a long time ago that a woman should always know more about her own money than anyone else does. That lesson would matter more than I could have imagined. I want you to understand the shape of what I gave over the years, because it matters to what comes later. When Vanessa was 24 and between jobs for 8 months, I paid her rent, $650 a month. For 8 months, no questions asked, no ledger kept, because that is what mothers do. When she went back to school for her marketing certificate, I covered the $4,200 in tuition myself rather than let her take out a loan, because I remembered what it felt like to watch Walter and me claw our way out of the debt from his first failed shop attempt. And I didn't want that weight on her before her life had even properly started. When her car transmission went out 3 years ago, I wrote a check for $2,800 without hesitation. And when she asked, sheepishly, whether I could maybe not mention it to Michael, I agreed, because I have never believed love should be a ledger the children compare against each other. I tell you these numbers not to keep score. I told you already, I am not a woman who wants applause for what I gave freely. But because when someone tells you you're old, you don't need it. It helps to remember exactly how much of yourself you had already handed over, gladly, before they decided to simply take the rest. I filled my days after Walter died with the library volunteer program, 3 mornings a week, reading to children too young yet for school, and with water aerobics on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons at the community center, and with Sunday dinners that I cooked the same way every week. A roast, or in summer, something off the grill Walter taught me to run better than most men who claim to know their way around one. My life was small, and it was mine, and it was, until that Tuesday in October, entirely peaceful. Vanessa is 33. She works in marketing for a mid-sized company downtown, makes decent money, and for the last year and a half, she has been dating a man named Derek Voss. Derek is charming in the particular way that makes older women like me instinctively check our purses. He calls me Mama Roz, which I never asked him to do and never corrected, because correcting a boyfriend feels like overstepping. And overstepping is not something a mother is supposed to do, not according to every article Vanessa has ever sent me about boundaries and letting her live her life. Derek had a job in sales for 2 years before he quit, 6 months ago, to build something of his own. What he wanted to build, specifically, was a chain of high-end mobile detailing services for luxury cars. Uber, but for washing a Mercedes in your own driveway. He called it Voss Auto Concierge. He needed, by his own accounting, $60,000 to get it off the ground. He had $11,000 of it from savings. He needed the rest. Looking back now, I can see there was a pattern building for months before I ever noticed the ring was gone, and I think that's true of most betrayals. They rarely announce themselves all at once. In August, I noticed the coffee can where I kept loose cash for the grocery delivery boy was lighter than it should have been, and I told myself I'd simply miscounted. In September, a small gold brooch that had been my mother's, not valuable, sentimental only, went missing from the top drawer of my dresser, and I assumed, foolishly, that I had misplaced it while reorganizing for the fall. Twice that same month, I came home from water aerobics to find small things, not quite where I'd left them. A chair pushed in slightly differently than my habit, the bathroom towel folded in thirds instead of in half, the particular kind of evidence that only someone who has lived alone for 6 years and developed very exact habits would ever notice at all. I mentioned it to Dot once, almost in passing, over coffee. "Probably just getting forgetful," I said, and she looked at me for a long moment and said, "Roz, you've never forgotten where you put anything in your life. Don't start deciding you have just because it's easier than the alternative." I didn't listen to her, not yet. I noticed it on a Tuesday. I was getting dressed for church and reached for my jewelry box, the same carved cedar box Walter bought me for our 10th anniversary, and the little compartment where the ring lived, wrapped in a soft cloth, was empty, just empty. I stood there for a long moment with my hand hovering over that empty space, telling myself I'd moved it, telling myself I was getting forgetful in my old age, the way Vanessa was always gently suggesting I was. I searched my dresser. I searched the bathroom. I searched the pockets of every coat in my closet, which is a foolish thing to do when you have never once taken a ring off in 31 years, but grief and panic make fools of all of us. It wasn't until I noticed the small chip of gold dust in the crease of the box's velvet lining. The box itself had been handled, opened, closed carelessly by someone who didn't know or didn't care how carefully I always closed it. That I understood this wasn't misplacement. Someone had been in my jewelry box. I should tell you that Vanessa has a key to my house. She has had one since Walter's funeral, for emergencies, and she has used it, over the past year, with increasing frequency, letting herself in on weekday afternoons just to check on me while I was at my water aerobics class, or my volunteer shift at the library, or my Thursday lunch with Dot. I never thought to question it. A daughter letting herself into her mother's house is not a crime. It is, I thought, a kindness. I was wrong about what it was. I called her that evening, and I asked, as calmly as I could manage, whether she'd seen my ring. There was a pause on the line, not a long one, just long enough for a woman who has known her daughter for 33 years to hear the shape of a lie forming before it arrives. "What ring?" she said. "My wedding ring, Vanessa." "Your father's mother's ring." Another pause. Then, "Oh, Mom, don't panic, okay? I was going to tell you. Derek needed some capital for the business, and that ring's just been sitting in a box doing nothing for 6 years. I figured, what's the harm? It's just sentimental. It's not like you wear it out anywhere." I sat down on the edge of my bed. I remember the exact texture of the quilt under my hand, a wedding gift from Walter's aunt, because in moments like that, your body starts cataloging small, useless details as a way of not falling apart. "You sold it," I said. "I didn't sell it. Exactly. I mean, okay, yes, I sold it. To a jeweler downtown, Feldman's, they gave us $11,000 for it, which honestly, Mom, that's more than I thought it was worth. So really, I did you a favor finding out. That ring was not yours to sell. And this is the part I want you to sit with, the part that told me everything I needed to know about who my daughter had become." She didn't apologize. She sighed. The particular sigh of someone being asked to be reasonable about something she's already decided isn't worth discussing. "Mom, you're 68. You don't need a diamond sitting in a drawer. Derek's business is going to make real money, and when it does, believe me, I'll buy you a new ring, a better one, and this will all be a funny story we tell people. You're old, Mom. You don't need it anymore. Can you please just be happy for us instead of making this into some huge thing?" I did not yell. I want to be very clear about that, because I know some of you listening are gripping your steering wheel right now, wanting me to have screamed at her, to have driven to her apartment and thrown something. I understand that feeling. I have felt it too, in my life, more than once. But screaming was never going to get me back 31 years of a marriage compressed into 4 grams of gold. Screaming was never going to teach my daughter a single thing about what she had done. I said, very quietly, "I understand." And I hung up the phone. Lies. All lies, I thought, sitting there in the dark. Everything about the last 18 months. Every Sunday dinner, every "I just wanted to check on you, Mom," every hug, had been reconnaissance. I had been casing my own life the way a burglar cases a house, except the burglar was my daughter, and I had let her in. The next morning, I called Dot. Dot Ferrero has lived 2 doors down from me since before Vanessa was born. She is 71 years old, buried a husband of her own 11 years ago, and has the particular clarity of a woman who has stopped pretending that politeness matters more than truth. I made coffee. She sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Vanessa had eaten 10,000 meals as a child, and I told her everything. Dot did not gasp. Dot did not tell me it would all work out. Dot said, "Sol Kessler still owns Feldman's on Route 9, doesn't he?" He knew Walter. Every jeweler within 30 miles knew Walter, because Walter fixed every one of their delivery vans for free when they were starting out and couldn't afford a real mechanic. I hadn't thought of that. I hadn't thought of Sol Kessler in 15 years. But Dot was right. In a town like ours, kindness leaves a paper trail, even when you don't mean it to. That was the moment the shift happened in me. Not rage. Something colder and steadier than rage. I decided, sitting at that table with my coffee going lukewarm in front of me, that I was not going to beg my daughter for an apology she clearly wasn't capable of giving. I was going to do something far more useful. I was going to find out exactly what my $500,000 heirloom, because that is what it was to me, regardless of what Feldman's paid for the gold weight, had actually funded, and I was going to make sure it cost my daughter's boyfriend far more than $11,000 to have taken it. I want to say something here, because I know how this sounds. I did not want to destroy my daughter. I have never, in 68 years, wanted to destroy anything that came from my own body. What I wanted was for her to understand, in a way that words clearly weren't reaching her, that a mother is not a resource to be liquidated when it becomes inconvenient to keep loving her properly. There is a difference between revenge and consequence. Revenge wants someone to suffer. Consequence simply refuses to protect someone from the truth of what they did. I chose consequence. The next afternoon, I drove to Route 9 by myself, without telling Dot where I was going, because some things a woman needs to do alone. Feldman's Fine Jewelry has occupied the same corner storefront for 38 years, and Sol Kessler, now 74, still works the counter most days because, as he told me, retirement bored him within 4 months and his wife sent him back. He recognized me before I said a word. "Rosalind Hale," he said, coming around the counter to take both my hands in his. "I haven't seen you since Walter's funeral." "What can I do for you?" I told him. "All of it." I watched his face change as I spoke, the polite customer service warmth draining into something harder, more careful. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, and then he said, "I remember that ring." I remember it specifically, Rosalind, because when the young woman brought it in, I recognized the setting. Walter's mother had it appraised here, back in 1974, before she gave it to him for you. It's in our old ledgers. I told your daughter that. I told her this ring has history in this store. He shook his head. She said her mother didn't want it anymore. I had no reason not to believe a grown woman telling me that about her own mother. "Do you still have it?" I asked, and my heart was somewhere up in my throat. "I do," he said. "I haven't listed it for resale yet. Something about it. I don't know, Rosalind. Something about it didn't sit right with me, taking it in. I was going to give it another week before I put it in the case." He went to the back and returned it to me himself, no charge, refusing even to let me repay the $11,000 he'd already given Vanessa, telling me that was between me and my daughter, not something Feldman's needed to be made whole on. "Walter fixed my delivery van for 6 years and never once let me pay him full price," he said. "This is the least I can do." I cried in the parking lot of that jewelry store for the first time since Walter's funeral. Not from sadness, from something more complicated, relief and grief, and a strange, sharpening kind of resolve. I had my ring back. I slid it onto my finger where it had lived for 31 years, and I felt, for the first time in a week, like myself again. But having the ring back wasn't the end of what I intended to do. Because $11,000 had already left my daughter's boyfriend's business account and been converted into equipment, into a website, into business cards with a logo I'd later see and think looked like it had been designed in about 4 minutes. And more importantly, I had learned something from Sol that changed everything about how I understood the size of what I was dealing with. "Your daughter's young man," Sol said, as I was leaving, almost as an afterthought. He mentioned he had an investor lined up too. Somebody named Whitfield, I think, putting in real money. 40, 50,000 on top of what he already had. Said the appraisal on the ring and a few other pieces he was planning to bring in would help show good faith to this Whitfield fellow. Financial responsibility, he called it. I told him I couldn't discuss another customer's items even if I'd bought them, but he mentioned it before I shut that down. A few other pieces. My chest went cold all over again. There was more he'd been planning to take. I did not confront Vanessa that week. I want you to understand why, because I think this is the part of the story where a lot of women would have made a mistake. If I had called her, ring in hand, and told her what I knew, she would have had time to prepare a defense, to enlist Derek in some story about how it was all a misunderstanding, to cry and apologize just enough to make me feel cruel for staying angry. I have watched my daughter manage difficult conversations her entire adult life. She is very good at it. She works in marketing. Managing perception is, quite literally, her profession. I was not going to give her the advantage of preparation. Instead, I called Ernesto Alvarez, a lawyer I'd used 11 years ago to help finalize Walter's estate, a careful, unhurried man who does not raise his voice, even when the situation calls for it. I told him everything, and I asked him one question. Was there anything legally I could or should do, given that the ring had technically been taken from my home without my knowledge or consent by someone with a key I had given her and sold to a third party? "Legally, Rosalind, you have a strong theft claim," he told me. "Whether you want to pursue that against your own daughter is an entirely different question, and one only you can answer. But I'd advise you, regardless of what you decide about pressing charges, to do 3 things immediately." He told me to change the locks on my house. He told me to update my will, which, at that point, still left the bulk of my estate split evenly between Michael and Vanessa to reflect whatever I decided her behavior deserved. And he told me to get, in writing, a full account of my financial position, separate from anything either of my children had access to, so that no one could ever again claim they didn't know what they were taking or claim entitlement to what remained. I changed the locks that same week. Vanessa didn't notice for 11 days. Which tells you something about how often she'd actually been checking on me versus how often she'd been letting herself in to see what else might be useful to her. I did not, in the end, call the police. Ernesto respected that decision without pushing me either direction, which I appreciated. What I did instead was something I think surprised even him when I told him the plan. I asked him to help me draft a document. Not a criminal complaint, but a formal, notarized letter stating clearly that any items removed from my home by Vanessa Hale without my explicit written consent, past or future, constituted theft, and that I reserved the right to pursue restitution or criminal charges at my discretion. I had it delivered, quietly, to Vanessa's apartment by courier, with no note, no explanation, just the document itself and my ring, freshly reclaimed, photographed sitting on my kitchen table beside it, so there could be no confusion about whether I knew what had happened or whether I had gotten it back. That was stage 1. Quiet. Legal. Undeniable. Stage 2 required something Sol Kessler had given me without realizing its full weight. A name. Bradley Whitfield. It took less than a day of searching to find him. A semi-retired businessman in his early 60s who'd made his money in commercial real estate and had apparently developed, in retirement, a habit of angel investing small sums in local startups that appealed to him, more for the entertainment of it, from what I could tell, than any serious expectation of return. He had a modest public profile, a few local news mentions about ribbon cuttings, a listed number for his office. I did not call him pretending to be anyone I wasn't. I have never believed in lying to get what I want. It worked out badly enough for me once, watching my daughter do it, that I wasn't about to become someone I despised in order to punish someone else for the same thing. I called his office and told his assistant, honestly, that I was the mother of Vanessa Hale, girlfriend of Derek Voss, and that I had information relevant to Mr. Whitfield's consideration of an investment in Voss Auto Concierge that I believed he would want before finalizing anything. I was prepared to be brushed off. I was not. Whitfield called me back himself within the hour, and I could hear in his voice the particular caution of a man who has learned, over decades of deals, that a call like this one is either nothing or it is the single most important phone call he'll get all month. I told him the truth, all of it, that the $11,000 of personal seed capital Derek had likely represented as savings or as a loan from family. I didn't know exactly what story Derek had told him, and I said so plainly, had in fact come from an heirloom stolen from my home and sold without my knowledge. I told him about the few other pieces Saul had mentioned, pieces that, as far as I knew, hadn't yet been taken, but had clearly been discussed as future collateral. I told him I wasn't calling to destroy anyone's business. I was calling because a man about to hand over $40,000 or $50,000 of his own money deserved to know the character of the person he was handing it to, and because. I said this last part very deliberately. I thought it might matter to him, as it would matter to me, whether the financial responsibility being pitched to him had actually been paid for by robbing a 68-year-old widow. There was a long silence on the line. Then Whitfield said, quietly, "Mrs. Hale, I appreciate you telling me this. I need you to know. I had already wired $10,000 as a good faith deposit 2 days ago." My stomach dropped. "But," he continued, "I hadn't signed the full agreement yet. I was supposed to meet with Derek and your daughter Friday to finalize the remaining 40. I think we may need to have a very different conversation on Friday than the one they're expecting." 2 days before that Friday meeting, Dot called me, her voice tight with something between anger and vindication. She had been having lunch at the diner on Route 9, the 1-2 doors down from Feldman's, small town coincidences being what they are. When Vanessa and Derek came in and took the booth directly behind hers, close enough that Dot, who has never in her life pretended not to listen to a conversation worth listening to, heard nearly all of it. Derek was going on about needing to shore up the good faith numbers before Friday, Dot told me. Your daughter said something like, "There's still Grandma Louise's brooch and the silver tea set. I just need the right moment. She barely uses either one." And then Derek said, "We just need to get through Friday. Once Whitfield's money is in, we won't need any of it." Dot paused. Roz, I wanted to stand up and say something right then and there. I didn't, because I figured you'd rather know than have me make a scene. But I wanted you to hear it exactly the way I heard it, because I think you need to know this wasn't a one-time mistake. This was a plan with a next step already picked out. I sat with that for a long while after I hung up the phone. My mother's brooch, the very one I'd noticed missing back in September and told myself I'd simply misplaced, had apparently already been taken or was still being planned for. I honestly couldn't tell which, and either possibility made my stomach turn in a way the ring alone hadn't quite managed. Grandma Louise's silver tea set, a wedding gift to my own parents in 1951, still sat in my dining room hutch, and the idea of Vanessa standing in that dining room, waiting for the right moment to take it while I was at church or the library, was a different kind of violation than the ring had been. Colder, more deliberate, less a single moment of poor judgment, and more a habit already forming. That conversation is the reason I didn't soften, even slightly, in the days that followed. It is the reason I moved the tea set and what remained of my mother's jewelry into a small safe deposit box at the bank the very next morning, a Wednesday, sitting across from a young loan officer named Priya Anand, who, when I explained in general terms what had happened, looked at me with the particular gentleness of someone who has seen this story before in other families and said, "You're doing exactly the right thing, Mrs. Hale. I wish more people came in before it got worse instead of after." She helped me set up the box, helped me review every account I held to make certain nothing else had been touched, and confirmed what I already suspected. The coffee can, the brooch, the small discrepancies I'd been explaining away since August were not forgetfulness. They were the opening moves of exactly the pattern Dot had just overheard being planned out loud in a diner booth, one town over from the jewelry store that still held my ring. I made one more call that week, this one to Vanessa herself. 4 days after the courier delivered my letter, 4 days of silence from her that I let sit exactly as long as it needed to. I called her on a Thursday evening, and I asked her, in a voice I kept perfectly level, to come by the house the next morning. "There's something I need to show you," I told her. "Bring Derek." She asked what it was about. I told her she'd find out tomorrow. I could hear, in the pause before she agreed, that my silence over the past week had unsettled her far more than any amount of yelling would have. I did not tell her that I already knew about Whitfield's Friday meeting, scheduled for that same afternoon, hours after whatever happened at my house that morning. I did not tell her that Whitfield and I had spoken twice more that week, and that he had, of his own accord, decided to call the meeting off entirely rather than confront it face to face. A courtesy, he told me, that he extended not to Derek, but to me, because he said a woman raising the alarm about her own child, at real personal cost, deserved to be the one who got to say her piece first. Friday morning came gray and cool, the kind of morning that feels like it's holding its breath. I made coffee. I did not make it for 3 people, the way I once would have, out of habit, out of hospitality. I made it for myself, and I set out exactly 2 mugs when I heard Vanessa's car in the driveway, because I did not intend to offer either of them comfort they hadn't yet earned. Vanessa came in first, and I want to tell you honestly, she looked terrible, not disheveled, not dramatic, just tired in the particular way of someone who has spent 4 sleepless nights running through every possible version of a conversation she can't control the outcome of. Derek came in behind her, and he had the look of a man trying very hard to seem unbothered, the kind of look I'd watched Walter's less honest customers wear when they were about to try to talk their way out of a bill. "Mom," Vanessa started, before she'd even sat down, "I know you're upset, and I've been thinking about it all week, and I really do think we should have gotten you a new ring already. The business stuff has been so overwhelming." "Sit down," I said. Not unkindly, just clearly. And something in my voice made her stop talking and sit. I laid the ring on the table between us. I watched her eyes go to it, watched the color leave her face slightly as she understood, in that instant, that I had already gotten it back, which meant every story she'd been quietly rehearsing about buying me a replacement, about it being just a misunderstanding, was already useless. "I know about the ring," I said. "I have it back. I paid nothing for it, because Sol Kessler respected your father enough not to let me pay for what should never have left this house. I know you told him I didn't want it anymore. I know that isn't true, and I think you know that isn't true. And I think somewhere in you, Vanessa, you knew exactly what you were doing when you took it, because you didn't ask me. You didn't ask me because you already knew what I would say." She started to cry, the fast, defensive kind of crying that comes from being caught rather than from remorse, and I let her cry without softening, because I have raised children, and I know the difference between tears that are asking for forgiveness and tears that are asking to be let off the hook. "I also know," I continued, "about Bradley Whitfield." Derek's face changed first. Vanessa's followed a half-second later, the way it does when you realize your partner already knows something you don't. "I called him myself this week," I said. "I told him the truth about where his good faith partner's seed money came from. I imagine you two were expecting to sit across from him this afternoon and finalize a $50,000 investment. I'd suggest you call and confirm that meeting before you drive over there, because I don't believe it's happening." Derek's jaw tightened. "You had no right to call him," he said, his voice low, the charm gone out of it entirely for the first time since I'd known him. "That had nothing to do with you." "It had my ring in it," I said. "My husband's mother's ring, sold to fund your business without my knowledge, by a woman who has a key to my house because I trusted her. It had everything to do with me the moment it funded your good faith deposit, Derek." I let that sit for a moment, and then I said the thing I had been holding on to all week, the thing I had rehearsed exactly once, alone, in my kitchen, until I could say it without my voice shaking. "I also know about my mother's brooch, and I know about Grandma Louise's tea set. I know you were waiting, Vanessa, for the right moment, because a friend of mine happened to be sitting in the booth behind you 2 days ago at the diner on Route 9. The tea set isn't in my hutch anymore. Neither is anything else of value in that house. It's all somewhere you'll never think to look, and it will stay there until I decide, if I ever decide, that you've earned the right to know where." Vanessa's face went through something complicated then. I watched the shame arrive, Real shame this time, not the defensive kind, as she understood that this hadn't been a single moment of temptation she could frame as a mistake made in isolation. It had been the start of something, a habit already taking shape, and I had caught it before it had the chance to fully form. "I wasn't going to actually take it," she said, quietly, not quite meeting my eyes. "I don't know. Maybe I was. I don't know anymore what I would have and wouldn't have done, Mom, and that scares me more than anything you've said today." "It should," I told her. "I'm calling him," Derek said, pulling out his phone, and I let him, because I already knew what he would find. I watched his face as the call connected, as he asked to speak to Mr. Whitfield, as whatever was said on the other end drained the last of the confidence out of him. He set the phone down slowly. "He pulled out," Derek said, mostly to Vanessa, his voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. He said he can't be associated with someone who financed a business off a stolen family heirloom. He wants his $10,000 back within the week or he's talking to a lawyer. I want to be honest with you. I felt no triumph in that moment. I had expected to. I had, if I'm being truthful with myself, spent parts of that week imagining this exact scene and feeling something sharp and satisfying about it in advance. But sitting there, watching my daughter's face collapse, watching a man I had never much liked realize that the foundation of everything he'd built over 6 months had just been pulled out from under him, there was no triumph in it. There was only a tired, aching sadness, the particular grief of watching your child face the consequences of who they've allowed themselves to become. "Mom," Vanessa said, when she could speak again, "please." Derek needed that money, I thought. I thought if the business worked, it would help both of us. I'd have never let you find out if I could have paid it back before. "Before what?" I asked. Before I noticed my own wedding ring was missing from my own jewelry box. "Vanessa, you didn't plan to tell me before I found out. You planned to hope I never checked. That is not the same thing, and I think you know it isn't. This is the part where I have to tell you the truth about my daughter, because I promised myself, before I started planning any of this, that I would not let anger turn her into a cartoon in my own telling of it. Vanessa is not a monster. She grew up in a house full of love, and somewhere between adulthood and ambition and a boyfriend who needed money he didn't have, she made a choice that a monster would have made without a second thought, and a decent person would never have made at all. And the honest, painful truth is that my daughter is somewhere in between those two things, still capable, I believe, of becoming someone better, but not without understanding fully what she'd done. Michael, my son, called me that same evening from Denver. Vanessa had apparently called him in a panic sometime that afternoon, looking for an ally, and instead found her brother asking her, with the same blunt honesty he's had since he was 7 years old, how she could possibly have thought this was going to end any other way. "She wanted me to talk you into forgiving her before you'd even decided not to," he told me. I told her I wasn't going to do that. I told her I was proud of you. Michael has always been steadier than his sister, less easily tempted by shortcuts, and I don't say that to compare them unkindly. Only to say that watching my 2 children respond so differently to the same crisis taught me something about how differently people carry the same raising. "Mom," he said, before we hung up that night, "I want to fly out this weekend. I don't like the idea of you handling all of this alone." I told him he didn't need to, that I had Dot and Ernesto, and now, apparently, a bank officer who'd become something like a friend, and that I was handling it exactly the way I wanted to handle it, quietly, on my own terms, without an audience. He didn't push, but he called every single day that week instead of waiting for Sunday. And on the Friday morning of the confrontation itself, he stayed on the phone with me for 20 minutes beforehand, not offering advice so much as simply being a voice in my ear, reminding me that whatever happened in that kitchen, I wouldn't be facing the rest of my life alone in that house, ring or no ring, daughter, or no daughter's forgiveness earned. It is a particular kind of comfort, at 68, to learn that at least one of the 2 people you raised turned out exactly as steady as you'd hoped, and I don't take that for granted, not for one single day. The reckoning, when it finally came, took 2 forms. Derek's came first, and it came exactly the way I told you it would at the start of this. The next morning, a Saturday, my doorbell ringing at 8:15 while I was still in my robe with my coffee. I opened the door and there he was, kneeling on my front porch, not out of theater, I don't think, but because his legs seemed to genuinely have gone out from under him somewhere on the walk-up. He wasn't holding the ring. I already had the ring, and he knew it. What he was holding, in both hands, held out to me like an offering, was a folded stack of papers. The dissolution paperwork for Voss Auto Concierge, already filed, along with a handwritten check for $11,000, his own money this time, not Whitfield's, not mine, drawn on an account I later learned he'd emptied almost entirely to make good on it. I know it doesn't undo it, he said, his voice cracking in a way that told me, whatever else was true about him, at least this part was real. Whitfield's lawyer already called me. I lost the business. I lost the deposit. I have to pay that back too. I needed you to know I'm not going to let Vanessa carry this by herself, and I needed to look you in the eye and tell you I'm sorry, because I let her talk herself into thinking this was okay, and I never once told her it wasn't. I took the check. I did not take him inside for coffee. Some apologies deserve acknowledgement without deserving comfort, and I have learned, at 68, exactly how to tell the two apart. Vanessa's reckoning took longer, and it was quieter, and in some ways it was harder to watch. She did not show up kneeling on any porch. She called me 3 days later, her voice raw from what I suspect was several days of crying she hadn't let me see, and she asked if she could come talk to me. Not to argue, not to defend herself, just to talk. I said yes. She sat at my kitchen table, the same table, and she told me things I hadn't fully understood before. That she and Derek had been quietly struggling financially for over a year. That some of the pressure to help fund his business had come from a fear that if she didn't, he'd leave. That she had told herself the story about the ring just sitting in a drawer so many times that some small, cowardly part of her had actually started to believe it. I don't say any of this to excuse what she did. I say it because I think the truth is rarely as simple as a villain and a victim, and I think a mother owes her daughter the honesty of seeing the whole shape of a mistake, even the parts that don't make it forgivable, if she's ever going to have any hope of the daughter not making it again. I updated my will this week, I told her, because I had decided, before she ever called, that she deserved to hear this from me directly rather than discover it later. I'm not cutting you out, Vanessa. I want to be clear about that, because I know that's what you're bracing for. But I restructured things so that anything meant for you is held in a trust that Ernesto Alvarez administers, not something you have direct access to, at least for the next several years. And I'm taking my key back, the one to this house. If you want to visit your mother, you'll knock on the door like anyone else who respects that this is still my home and not a resource to be managed. She cried again, but differently this time. Not the fast, cornered tears from Friday morning, but something slower. Something that looked more like grief for who she'd almost let herself become. I don't know how to fix this, she said. You don't fix it in one conversation, I told her. You fix it by being a different kind of daughter for the next 10 years than you were for the last one. I'll still be here. I'm not going anywhere. But trust isn't a ring, Vanessa. You can't just go take it back out of a drawer whenever you decide you want it again. It has been 4 months now since that Saturday morning Derek knelt on my porch. Vanessa comes to Sunday dinner most weeks, and she knocks now, every time, even though I've told her more than once that she's welcome to just walk in like she used to. I think she knocks because she needs to, more than because I need her to. Derek is gone, not because I demanded it, but because Vanessa, in the weeks after everything fell apart, told me she'd started to see clearly what kind of foundation their relationship had actually been built on, and it wasn't one she wanted to keep building on. Whitfield, oddly enough, sent me a short note a few weeks later thanking me for the call, telling me it had confirmed something he'd already half suspected about the deal, and that he hoped my ring brought me as much comfort now as it clearly always had. I keep that note in the same cedar box where the ring lives again, wrapped in its soft cloth, exactly where it belongs. Grandma Louise's tea set is back in the hutch now, and my mother's brooch sits again in the dresser drawer where it belongs, though I'll admit I still count the pieces every so often, out of a caution I don't think will ever fully leave me now, and I'm not sure it should. Priya at the bank still calls occasionally, just to check in, which is more kindness than most institutions bother with these days, and I've come to think of her as something like a friend. Saul Kessler sends me a Christmas card every year now, and last December he included a photograph of the original 1974 appraisal ledger page with Walter's mother's name on it, just so I'd have it, he said, in case anything ever happened to the store's old records. I keep that, too, in the cedar box. I think often about the version of that October where I did exactly what my first instinct told me to do, where I called Vanessa the moment I found the empty velvet compartment and screamed at her, demanded the money back, made it a war fought in raised voices across a kitchen table. I don't think that version of me would have gotten the ring back. I don't think that version of me would have learned about the brooch, or the tea set, or the plan already quietly forming for what came after Friday. Fury feels like power in the moment you're feeling it, but it rarely buys you anything except the temporary satisfaction of having been loud. What actually changed things was patience and information, and the willingness to let consequence do work that anger never could. I wear it every day. I have never taken it off since Sol Kessler placed it back in my hand in that parking lot, and I don't intend to, not for as long as I'm still here to wear it. Some mornings, doing the dishes or working in the garden Walter loved so much, I catch the light hitting that small, honest diamond exactly the way it did the night he put it on my finger, and for a moment I am 22 years old again, standing under Christmas lights strung in July, certain of very little except that I had married a good man and that whatever came next, we would face it together. Walter has been gone 6 years now, and there are still mornings I reach across the bed out of habit before I remember. But the ring stays. It doesn't just carry Walter anymore, though it still carries him every single day. It carries something else now, too. The knowledge that a woman my age, a woman the world likes to describe as fragile, as forgetful, as someone who doesn't need things anymore, can still, when it matters, be sharper and steadier and more resolved than anyone expects her to be. I was not a special person to my daughter that terrible week. But I reminded her, and I suppose I reminded myself, of exactly who I'd always been. If this story stayed with you, I would love to hear from you in the comments. Tell me, what would you have done in my place? And from where in the world are you listening? Don't forget to like and subscribe, please. There is so much more waiting for you. With love and respect. Until next time.